can write, you can ask the questions.
That's true. Are you going to be around in New York?
Yes, definitely.
I have to get that evaluation form for Victor's sake.
Ah, yeah, okay.
Is there a way I could get it to you tomorrow, or can I drop it in your
Yes, of
mailbox?
course. Yes, perhaps it's the easiest thing to put it in my mailbox in what is it, Town Hall?
Yeah.
402.
402. Okay.
I'll also be at this conference at the Berkman Center.
Oh, you will be.
And Society. You too?
I am going to try. I'm going to zip in and out. I have things during the day. Unfortunately, I can't go to all.
Me too. To not to risk that we miss each other, perhaps it's better to just drop it in the mailbox. 402. 402. It's like 42 with an O in between. The
meaning of yes,
everything.
Exactly.
Right?
Deep font.
Hi.
When do you head to Germany?
On the 23rd. So I had to book the flight well in advance, and I wasn't sure when I would have my exams. So I just put it on the plan. Yeah. But it's fine. So I'm going to arrive on the 24th in the morning, early in the morning, and that's okay. So it's not too far from the airport in Hamburg to my parents' hometown. It's a small town in the north.
Where?
Of Germany. It's Schleswig. It's close to the border to Germany.
So in Schleswig-Holstein?
Yeah. I said, wow, you're an expert.
Ich kann nicht Englisch.
Ah,
Die schön.
sehr gut. Hast du das in der Schule gelernt?
Ja. Ich habe das Kirchenmeister. Aber alles.
Ja. Das ist aber gelogen. Das ist aber gelogen.
Ist die Gute. Seit habe ich es.
That's not too bad. Was that training?
I have to go. It's the only way. I'm trying. It just. I had to learn it so fast. And so then. And I never got a chance to go, so I never fully solidified it. I was planning on doing it every day, even for the summer. Finding someplace to just go study music. And then I almost had a chance to go to Vienna. But the program imploded, and the funding imploded.
Probably also speaks Spanish.
My girlfriend is rich. We've been so busy, so many important projects. We've been working on documents in English. They haven't experienced working on my graduate school application. She's working on her fellowship application. She's so we've been basically sitting with laptops opposite each other at dinner, writing letters and writing various other essays.
Sitting at the same table.
It's good. Like we're not speaking Spanish, which is what I need to do. When I go down to
But this utmost say everything that's important.
she's actually she started learning insurance. She went to British. Studied. She was in Montana for a year, in San Francisco for 2 years, LA for 2 years as a kid. She's gone. What did you do?
school, like everyone usually fifth grade on, if it's it's a subject in school. I think mostly it's used for language development.
Is it compulsory?
Yes, it depends good on the school, but in general I'd say it's so it's the same thing. You can learn a lot in theory and by teachers who are mostly German and active in this space and in English-speaking country, but that's not the same as this which we live in the United States. Anyway,
My problem is most of my German professors. Austrian, Polish. So I never learned. I only speak English. Can't do
that's not that important. I think you always have like even not like a girlfriend or a language. It can also be very charming.
I've never heard an American call charming. But in any language.
That's the friendship. It's like a
It's the Irish, actually. No, I've never heard an Irishman speaking.
No. Actually, we've been on the lookout because there's Tayu, and he. Okay.
Has he got seats for you?
I see it.
You want by the mic. Do you have a question in mind?
Not really. But I think it's more convenient to sit here than down there. Because it's sent him an email. Did you also get one?
I got it.
I want to
Unfortunately,
sign up for this email list of his amount of interest. What is it? Pick in science, technology, blah blah blah. And they didn't know that CD is not limited, so that's okay because there's virtually nobody here.
which is unfortunate. I mean, it is. I should be home tight.
Yeah, me too.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum here at the Kennedy School of Government. I'm Phil Sharp, Director of the Institute of Politics, and we're very pleased tonight to bring you this forum, which is really the opening of a major conference, a university-wide conference on the internet and politics, which is primarily sponsored by the Berkman Center with the Harvard Law School. The Berkman Center has been sponsoring a critical engagement on these issues of the internet in a whole variety of ways of our society, and we at the Institute of Politics were delighted this year when they naturally focused on the politics, because you didn't have to be paying much attention this year to understand there was a significant new energy and effort and outcome of the use of the internet in our American political campaigns this year. So with that, let me just welcome you, but also very significantly thank the Berkman Center for their extraordinary work in multiple ways, but in particular in this conference that they are launching tonight, and to introduce their Executive Director, John Palfrey.
Thank you so much for coming, Congressman Sharp. This is a huge honor for anyone who was here as an undergraduate, as I was, to actually be at the forum. It's really one of the crown jewels of Harvard University, and we're delighted to kick off our conference here, and thank you for making this space possible. Thank you also to the forum staff, Bill and Greg and Christian and others. This event tonight is the formal kickoff of a biannual conference that the Berkman Center and partners around the university host. We are absolutely delighted to start it here with such a wonderful panel. I want to thank a few people in the context of the broader conference as well. The conference would not be possible, this free 3-day conference, without the support of Wendy Koslow, the conference coordinator, and the team at the Berkman Center, who have done an amazing job in pulling things together. And likewise, we would not be here but for the very generous and able support of eBay, which has partnered with us all the way through on the substance and financially as well. Todd Cohen, the Deputy General Counsel and Vice President, has been with us and supportive all the way. He has also committed on behalf of the company to continue this inquiry into internet and politics, hopefully for the next several years, including an event in the second half of 2005 in England, ideally at Oxford, which will be on a similar topic, and we're very excited to continue the conversation thereafter. So hopefully we'll see you on the other side of the pond as well. And before we get going, just to introduce a very distinguished host that we have tonight. Kathleen Matthews is a veteran journalist. She spent 25 years in broadcast. She has been in every important role, of course, producer, reporter, now an anchor. She has 9 local Emmys to her name. She is also a fellow at the Institute of Politics here at the Kennedy School, where she's teaching an intriguingly named study group called the Tower of Babel. That's with 3 B's, exactly on the topic that she's leading on tonight. So with that, thank you so much.
John, thank you very much. And thank you, Phil. And thank you, Todd, for making all of this possible this weekend. I think we're going to be sort of traversing some interesting terrain tonight and over the next couple of days where you see the intersection of politics, business, and technology. And in business these days, they say there are 2 kinds of people: those who see the web as a useful tool, and those who say the web is going to change everything in our lives. I think we're going to have that debate going on here tonight. We look forward to hearing from all of you, and we're going to start with some comments from the panel, and then we're going to open it up to questions from all of you. The rules tonight are basically the rules of television. We're going to speak in sound bites, or we're going to speak in blog speak quickly and directly, and we urge all of you to do the same when you ask your questions. You know, for years we've been electing a president, or more specifically for our 2 panelists here today, we've been getting a president elected using both, I think, right brain and left brain activity. And there's a lot of talk about that in the business community today as well. Left brain, of course, is a numbers game, and in politics that means raising money, it means organizing volunteers, it means analyzing poll data, getting out those voters that are your base. It's a very sequential kind of process. But there's a lot of right brain activity that's been going on in politics for the last 100 years. And of course, that's the creative, intuitive part, the part where candidates are empathetic with the voters, they understand what the voters are feeling, and it's a very emotional process. And I think we really saw a lot of that kind of activity in 2004. All of this kind of like a high stakes chess game where the point of the game is to keep your king and queen on the board and knock theirs down. But chess changed dramatically between 1987, when the chess master Kasparov said, "No computer will ever beat me," and 2003, where he had to eat his words. The computers were able to beat him at the game of chess. And tonight we want to know whether that will be true of Karl Rove 4 years from now. Will the net be able to beat somebody as intuitive who's got the instincts of a Karl Rove? So we're going to be exploring these issues in the next hour, how the internet is facilitating campaigns, how it's empowering voters, and how much politics is still very much a touchy-feely process that favors the candidate who just has the best story to tell, who connects best with the people that get out to the polls. So let me introduce our 2 panelists. From organizing DENIACs to parties for the president, our panelists have been pioneers in using the internet in politics, and that really came to fruition in 2004. They share credit, these 2 men, for bringing voter interest to an all-time high and creating an all-time high voter turnout in 2004. Joe Trippi started this process, this voyage in politics when he was 17 years old in California. In 1984, he managed Walter Mondale's first place finish in the Iowa caucuses. He's been a campaign manager ever since for Democratic Senate, congressional, gubernatorial, and mayoral campaigns. And most recently, you all know him as the man who managed Howard Deed's campaign for president. And in the process, according to the New Republic magazine, he reinvented politics as we know it. So I want you to all welcome Joe Trippi to our panel tonight. He's joined, of course, by another political junkie, this one from the other campaign, the Grand Old Party. His career in politics started 10 years ago in 1994 when he created one of the first state party websites on the internet. He then served as the e-government portfolio manager for the Government to Citizen project at the Office of Management and Budget. And who could have imagined there'd be a position in government like that 10 years ago? He also was the technology advisor to Grassroots Enterprise, which is an internet-focused public affairs firm. And in 2004, this year, he was the e-campaign director for Bush Cheney, overseeing the Republican Party's most sophisticated online campaign in history, marshaling 7.5 million internet activists to communicate the president's message and also turn out the largest vote in American history. He's currently the e-campaign director for the Republican National Committee, and please welcome Michael Turk tonight. Again, we want you to speak, gentlemen, in blog speak, quick sound bites, and then we'll give our audience a chance to kind of probe a little further into to your answers. So let me start with you, Michael, since to the victor goes the first question tonight. People have said that the internet transformed politics in the 2004 campaign. There's a lot of stuff that gets hyped up in our coverage of these campaigns. Do you think that's hype, or do you think this really was a revolution that we saw in 2004?
Well, I think it's a revolution that's been building for a long time. Going back to 1994, when I first started getting involved in the web and politics, there was a lot that was going on that you really couldn't do on the web. I mean, you could basically put up a brochure, but you couldn't do much else. One of the things that this campaign was really fueled by was the fact that there's so many more tools, the database technologies, the geographic information systems, the things that you can do to really connect people to the campaign and personalize the message that you're sending. So I think it's transformative in the fact that the people really, the campaigns finally really had the ability to speak on a much more individual level to activists, and that in turn fueled the activists' excitement about the campaigns.
Joe writes about that revolution, which he says will not be televised. What do you mean by that, Joe?
I don't think television's a very passive medium. I mean, it's basically one way unless there's an 800 number attached to it somehow. And so it's very primitive in terms of being able to have people interact with it. The internet is actually, I think, the most powerful thing since the printing press, because it's the printed word, but people instantaneously can communicate with each other, exchange ideas. And the one thing I think that I would say that really has changed, particularly in 2003, and all the campaigns started to do this, was the big question was, would people get out from behind the machine, not just send emails to each other, but actually go out, meet with each other on a monthly or weekly basis, or go out and work the precincts and be able to structurally get people to use the net as an organizing tool that actually got them out into the community and doing things. And that was a huge sea change from anything we've seen in any year prior. I mean, McCain was able to get thousands of people to sign up, but this year the jump was people are actually using it to go out in the community and work with each other. And I'll do one quick bite on this, but to keep with your rule. But what really I think what this year really was about is Americans having faith in strangers again. And I know that's a hard concept to get, but I think that it's about trust building over the internet that in a lot of ways is building more trust than we actually have with our neighbors. I mean, there's a community of trust that builds on the net. And eBay and AOL and a lot of companies had to go through, it was a lot of corporate stuff that got done to build the net to the maturity it is right now. But there's now community, people were, the one example I give you, no one in this country will go put on a telephone pole outside, my name's Joe Trippi at 1313 Elm Street, come to my house, let's talk about our neighborhood or our future. And I don't know, you just come. This year, thousands and thousands of people were doing that on the internet, putting their name out there, their address out there, trusting other Americans to come. The internet was doing that. It was trust that was built by a lot of people, companies out there. And I think the most amazing thing was out of thousands and thousands of meetings, people came, and when they left, the jewelry was still in the jewelry box. The silverware was still in the silver drawer, and the china was still in the china cabinet. No one ripped off anything. American people are good, and they actually started having faith in each other and working together in ways that I don't think would have been possible without the internet.
Let's really get into nuts and bolts on this, because we know hope you're okay. For 100 years, politics was, you'd get the groceries delivered at your door. Your party would sponsor your Little League team. And then on election day, you were given a little walking around money, and sort of key people in your community would go out and make sure that everybody showed up at the polls that was going to support that candidate who'd been doing all these good things in the community. That evolved to television, where it was not retail politics, but wholesale politics. And suddenly messages were on television, big media buys. In this campaign, what were the specific kinds of things that were going on that got people involved, that communicated messages that were new or had been brought to a new level of sophistication? Michael? Let's start with a website.
I think that, for the past probably 4 or 5 years, one of the big things in both politics and just in general has been the growth of viral marketing, people actually passing messages back and forth to one another and actually talking to each other about things. And I think that's one of the real key motivators in the campaign, is when you give people the ability to sort of recruit for the campaign, and when you give people the ability to talk to each other about the campaign through house parties or through parties for the president, and you give people the ability to relate to each other one-on-one and actually have them spreading the message of the campaign instead of, sort of there are still obviously sort of opinion leaders in communities who do a lot of that, but when you break down that process and you give people the ability to interface one-on-one and talk about ideas, I think that generally they tend to gravitate toward that, and I think that a lot of the reason why there was so much more interest in politics is because there was so much more of that interchange going on.
How about more interest because more people had an easy ability to contribute and financially invest in campaigns? How much did that evolve between 2000 and 2004?
Well, I think, obviously there was a great deal of media attention paid to the Dean campaign for the money that you raised online for the Kerry campaign. We had the advantage that we had been raising a great deal of money online through offline mechanisms, and so as a result, we generally tended to focus more on looking at ways to get the volunteer base excited and get them communicating and get them spreading the message rather than through money. But certainly there's an aspect of it that the internet does break down the barriers to being able to raise money effectively.
How'd that work out in the Dean campaign, Joe? First from contributing money, but also specifically how Meetup was used in the Dean campaign.
Well, the net is making a lot of the standard powers in politics more irrelevant. People weren't taking their cues from other party leaders, I think, in either party. I agree with what Michael's saying. It was the Dean campaign happened over the water cooler at work, over the neighbor's fence, over the dinner table at home. The net spread that message, but then what happened was it was people actually interacting with each other, either on the net or taking information they were getting from the campaign and talking to their coworkers, their friends, and their neighbors about it, which actually made us grow in ways that we never could have. We weren't getting any media attention or anything. This was all happening peer-to-peer, friend-to-friend, neighbor-to-neighbor, and it just took on a life of its own because the life of it was these people. And I remember we started with 432 people trying to go to Meetup. It was kind of hilarious because one was in Seattle and one was in South Dakota and one was in Texas, and you're trying to figure out how they're going to meet up. But they on their own, started to talk to friends. They come to this meeting, and suddenly we grew to 190,000 Americans meeting on the first Wednesday of every month in a community center or a Starbucks or something. And like the way the money rate happened, the first way money's happened in the Dean campaign was some guy at a New York meetup sent out an email saying, let's give Howard Dean $10 each and send it into him on the net, and let's put a penny at the end of our contribution, so whenever they get that penny, they know it came from us Meetup people. Well, this is an idea that came from the campaign. $400,000 came in 3 or 4 days, and they all had this $10 and a penny, $25 and a penny. It was spontaneous, it was out there, it was people doing it, and they were spreading the word about the penny. We didn't have anything to do with it.
You also would give people marching orders on the on your website as to what you needed, and you saw immediate response to that in the Dean campaign.
Yeah, we did very basic stuff. When we had the 432 people, all we did was ask them to go. The most important thing you can do for the Dean campaign is talk to one more family member or one more friend or one more coworker and tell them about Howard Dean and get them to join up. And when we asked them to do that, they would go do it. If we asked them to send us money and gave them a reason why we needed it, people responded. It was, But they also responded with their own creativity, their own energy. I mean, a lot of the great ideas of the Dean campaign did not come from people sitting in a corner office in Burlington, Vermont. It came from people out there in a meeting who came up with an idea, sent it into us. We thought it was great. We would do it. They knew that they had had an impact on the campaign. They knew that we were listening to them. They knew they owned a portion of the campaign, if not all of it. And that was something I think that was at the time quite a bit different from campaigns past.
But wasn't it almost anarchy, having no hierarchy? I mean, it seems like the Dean campaign within this model was also a sea of confusion, as opposed to the Bush-Cheney campaign, which was a more hierarchical institution with an architect running it. What was the difference between the two in terms of how they used the internet, or was that the difference? Is it a matter of a combination of those two things?
What I'd say about that is that we were running two totally different campaigns. One guy's president of the United States, and the other guy is at zero with 432 people. I mean, we don't have the ability to immediately on one day hire state directors in 50 states or have a huge operation out there. We're building this out of, I mean, I used to laugh and tell people that the Kerry campaign went out on the first day and bought stainless steel axles for the race car. We were sending 22-year-old kids out to collect aluminum cans on the side of the road so we could melt them down and turn it into, and recycle them into an aluminum axle, knowing that when aluminum gets energy going through it, it melts. So, I mean, it's a difference between running an insurgent campaign like McCain had to do in 2000, and just all insurgent campaigns have that little lack of control to them, because you never got to build a command and control system from day one and hire all those people.
So what kind of a candidate has an advantage in an internet-driven campaign?
I don't know that it's necessarily one has more of an advantage than the other. It's just tailoring your internet strategy toward whatever the campaign happens to be. Because we were a presidential campaign, there were a lot of things that we looked at doing online that frankly, if we were a challenger race, might have been a little bit sort of less than dignified. Some of the cartoon things that were going around on the internet, while great attention getters and great viral tools, weren't necessarily something that you would associate with the President of the United States. And so you're kind of limited in doing some of those things. There may be an advantage there in that and a challenger race has more leeway in terms of the things that they can do online. But I think that in terms of what we did with our campaign, and specifically talking about the organizational structure, we were continually being contacted by people who just said, I am a huge believer in the president and I want to get involved in this. How do I do it? And so what we were primarily looking at was building the tools that would enable them, the sort of self-starters, to get out there and organize on their own. So we looked at doing things like putting walk lists online and putting call sheets online, so that those people could do that from the privacy of their own home, get involved with the internet and start doing a lot of those things. Providing the maps so that they'd know where to walk, and giving them all of that information so that they could get out and do that, and without necessarily having the command and control structure in place.
The one interesting thing is transparency, and they didn't have this problem as much, because in the primaries, the Dean campaign was putting letter lists up on the internet of that you could download names of undecided voters out there and ask people to write a letter or something to contact them. And it didn't take a brain surgeon to figure out that within days of us doing that, the Kerry campaign was saying, go over to the Dean site, pull down one of those names, and write a Kerry letter to those undecideds. And Wes Clark was doing the same thing. And so we had, I think in the end, because we started monitoring it once we figured out what was going on, we had something like 145,000 letters written. But we know we were only responsible for about 95,000, 100,000. So somewhere in there, the Kerry campaign and the Clark campaigns were scarfing our database because it's out there in the open on the net. So there are some interesting things that, as we move forward down this new road that we're on, in a more competitive primary for the Republicans, these same things are going to be problems that you didn't really face this time.
Yeah, I know in '99 at the Iowa straw poll, I was involved in a campaign that fed 4,000 people and got 900 votes. So,
What are some of the other limitations of an internet-driven campaign? Joe, why don't you talk a little bit about how you sort of got all these people around the country, thousands, hundreds of thousands, to meet up. They converge on Iowa, and yet the process of identifying Dean supporters and getting them to the polls seemed to break down. Was that a breakdown in the internet, or is that where the internet ends and sort of the Wizard of Oz who says pay no attention to that man behind the screen is supposed to step in a campaign?
That's not what happened in the Dean campaign. Was we had 37,000 Dean supporters identified in Iowa. The organization did that. The problem comes in when the Iowa tape, in which the governor said Iowa was a bunch of extremists, or caucuses are made up of a bunch of extremists, and why would anybody waste their time going to a caucus, happened, I think, about 10 days before the Iowa caucuses. In our own polling, we fell 10 points in one night. Now, if you've ID'd 37,000 people, and you're sitting at about 40% in the polls, and you drop 10 points from 40 to 30, that means you lost 25% of those 37,000 people in one night. It gets you about 22, 23,000 people. So now you've got a problem, because you don't know which of your supporters to pull and which to leave home. You have to pull them all. And a couple other, there was a 78-year-old Republican gentleman who stood up in the middle of a town hall, and Howard Dean said, "Sit down, you've had your turn, it's my turn to speak." And of course, the Iowa News only showed Howard saying, "Sit down, and it's my turn." We fell another 5 points that day. So what was going on was it's a mistake, I think, to come out of the Dean experience saying, hey, you had 650,000 people out there, they contributed $59 million, how come they couldn't win Iowa for you? There is this thing called real politics, and if you suffer the consequences if you make mistakes. And I made one the Sunday before, the Friday before. I was on Crossfire, and Paul Begala says in a rave about how great the campaign is, says you got Bill Bradley, you got Al Gore, you got all these members of Congress. Who's next? Jimmy Carter? And I'm on air, and God, I don't know what possessed me, but I said, come to Plains, Georgia on Sunday and find out, because we were going down to Plains, Georgia Sunday to see Carter. Carter hadn't invited us, and he wasn't going to endorse us. Now, I knew that. And so
it's like Gary Hart saying,
Joe,
trail me.
yeah, it's like, Joe, you stupid idiot, what were you thinking? So, like, the second it came out of my mouth, I want to bring it back in, but by the time I'm even trying to explain myself, ABC, CBS, NBC, MSNBC, New York Times are doing, it's a miracle, they're even getting Jimmy Carter. Well, Sunday comes, Jimmy Carter goes into the press briefing and says, I didn't invite him, and I'm not endorsing him. And this is 2 days before Iowa that this is going on. This is the Sunday before the caucus, I think maybe the day before. So that hurt us. I mean, I'm not saying coward. I want to make clear here, the campaign made a bunch of errors that really just devoured our strength of support, and the best organization in the world couldn't have changed that. They were going out and they were pulling 37,000 people out that they believed were going to vote for Howard Dean, and a good 16,000 decided at the last minute, from our own mistakes, I think, and some of the drumming we're taking in the press, that, hey, I'm going to go vote for John Kerry or John Edwards, and that's what happened.
So, Michael, as you look at how the internet was used in the Bush-Cheney campaign in 2004, take us to 4 years from now. In business, they say, do you improve and maintain, or do you destroy and recreate? Are you going to improve and maintain what you've done, or do you see this going through an even more transformational next step?
I think it will, and I think that that's largely due to the difference in technologies that'll be available 4 years ago. I mean, thinking back at the campaign 4 years ago, the geographic systems where you could actually to send an email to a voter saying, this is your house, this is where you go vote, these are the directions on how you get there. Those things just weren't possible 4 years ago, and the difference in technology that's going to be available 4 years from now is going to be startling. I think that you're going to see the same types of things. You're going to be looking at what sort of tools can you give people to spread the message. You're going to be looking at what sort of tools can you create to help make sure that your people turn out and vote. And you're going to be looking at what sort of tools can you make available online so that the things that people are used to doing in politics, the door-to-door operations, the picking up the phone and making the calls, how can you make those things available online? to people who may not necessarily want to get involved in the campaign at the headquarters, but they do want to get involved and help out in whatever way they can.
Your colleague Mark McKinnon, who did the television spots for Bush Cheney, was here today at Harvard, and he talked about how he's going to go out of business one of these days because this process of creating TV spots, placing them on the air, and in this campaign, $1.5 billion was spent on the political advertising. That's going to become obsolete when everybody has TiVo or a TiVo-like system within their server, and they can block out those ads. In fact, they're very skeptical of those ads today. But he thinks the internet will be the place where that kind of message will be going on. How do you see that working?
Well, I think Mark sells himself short because he did a lot of really good work for the campaign, just some phenomenal stuff in terms of the messages that we were putting out via the internet. For instance, he did a piece in conjunction with the E-campaign that was a TV spot essentially on the web where it was Laura Bush discussing education and why specifically working moms and mothers should look at Bush's education policies as a reason to elect the president. And so I think that what you're going to see is, especially there's so many vendors now who are looking at doing full motion video on the web as interstitials between pages that you land on. I know Honda for a long time on I think it was the New York Times had big interstitial that popped up that was essentially an ad for their car. I don't think that the need for that kind of advertising is necessarily going to go away. I just think it's going to move to sort of different mediums. It's going to be presented in different ways. I think that there's something very compelling about video, which is why a lot of what you see on the internet still sort of leans toward the lessons learned from TV. If you can make a message very compelling, show movement, show those sorts of things, I don't think it's necessarily going to go away, but I think certainly the web is going to be where a lot of people get their information, and it's where they get the persuasive messages.
So Joe, let's say I'm a voter in 2007, and I voted for Howard Dean, and I kind of got soured about politics in the intervening time, and I've moved on with my life, and I'm sitting at home at my computer in 2007, and I really haven't been paying that much attention to politics, but I know a presidential campaign's coming up. How are you going to communicate with me?
It's going to be.
Where is it going to come in? How am I going to decide to read it, watch it, block it?
I think two things. First of all, you got to go back to McCain in 2000, and John McCain had, I think, something like 40,000 people sign up for him on the internet or contribute to him over there. I mean, it was something like 40,000 people. Meetup.com didn't exist. Simple tools like Get Local, just putting the zip code up there and being able to look at where events were. I mean, really simple tools, primitive tools, did not exist in 2000. So a lot of the stuff that the Dean campaign was doing and later in the Bush campaign and Kerry campaign were doing are light years. There was no way I think anybody could have told you in 2000 what 2004 would have looked like. And I think by 2007, 2008, people would be saying, Trippy, the Bush guys, so yesterday what they were doing on the internet. Compared to what people would be doing then. Today, my guess, two things. One is the Dean campaign was running over broadband a video channel 24 hours, 7 days a week. And when we first started the thing, we were using a company called Wave Express that had a really unique system on how to cache it into memory and get it out there and put it out to anybody who really wanted it. And at first we were sitting there going like, how are we going to feed 24 hours and 7 of this stuff? And it was a headache at first. And then a really interesting thing happened. All over the country, people started creating their own stuff. I mean, their own video of just having Howard come and speak, or just seeing him stopping and running a camera with him in the coffee shop. I remember my favorite one was Howard got to some university. He was about to go in and speak, and just then he's introduced to the two students who organized this meeting. And one of them says, "I'm so excited about this, I'm skipping my finals." And Howard just gets this, all of a sudden turns from presidential candidate to father, and just gets this horrified look on his face and says, "Don't do that, please don't do that for me." And it was such a human moment, but it was all these people, and by the end, not 1 minute of the 24 hours was being produced by the Dean campaign. And we looked at this isn't that crazy decentralized thing. We looked at it, we watched it. If we thought it was good, we put it up. But it really unleashed a great creativity out there where people, where McKinnon and guys like me who make television may well be out of the business because a lot of the stuff was better than what any of the consultants were doing that was being created. Jib Jab's another example about how, you know, two people can create something that, again, that had to be outside the campaign for the obvious reasons, but things are happening out there, creativity is being unleashed by this, and an empowerment's it's really empowering people to do things differently, and I think it's going to change everything.
So websites may morph into digital channels for the candidates, so you can start looking at them and watching them and getting a feel for them very early on. What else? I guess we'll be talking about the parties, having the conventions covered on broadcast television, or will you just have party channels that will be going streaming video on the net, and they'll have their conventions, you know, distributed that way?
I don't know if you're likely to necessarily see that. I mean, there are some things that you know that we started to take a look at. I know some of the Kerry campaign took a look at in terms of ways to access a lot of different information about a lot of different things. For instance, the various news feeds from one of the big things that everybody always talks about is what is the journalism that's covering politics going to look like a couple of years down the road, and in terms of, you know, how prevalent are blogs going to be in the coverage of blogs, and how prevalent are sort of these individuals commentators going to be, and so you begin to look at things like that, and you begin to look at like RSS feeds and how people can sort of distribute their blog that way, and then you look at news aggregators where you can sort of plug in multiple RSS feeds, and so you sort of create your own media window by using all of those technologies. I think that may be more likely what you begin to see.
I think email will be supplanted by RSS feeds as a way to as the way of choice for the average voter or consumer or citizen out there to take information from a campaign, and so you'll see those kind of changes. I think the blogosphere is here to stay and is just going to continue. I mean, when we started the Dean campaign, I think the day we started, I remember looking at Technorati or whatever, I can't remember what site I was looking at, and there was something like 1.2 million blogs at the time. This morning it's 4.8 million blogs. This is over like a 13 or 14, 15 month period. The problem is the press and everybody keeps looking at these blogs that are getting the huge traffic. Well, that's not where the real power of the blogosphere is. The power of the blogosphere is this long tail of 4 million blogs that have 10, 15, 20 readers. And if you think about that, 4.5 million blogs, even if they average 10 readers, is 45 million Americans. I mean, it could just be my mom and my best friends, but they're reading what you know, my thoughts are. And there's no way to stop that or to sort of control that. And so I think how the media and how politicians and parties figure that out is going to be really one of the most interesting things about the next 4 years.
One of the pivotal moments in this campaign was when Dan Rather on 60 Minutes did a report on George Bush's National Guard service. And within 19 minutes into that report, already blogs were weighing in and discrediting the documents. How do you see the credibility of the blogs expanding in the next 4 years between now and the next election? And what kind of an effect do you think they're going to have on mainstream media in that way they did with Rather?
Well, I think what you're going to see is you're going to see more stories like that, and I think the reason you're going to see that is because the 4.5, 4.8 million blogs that exist now, another year from now, you know, if it again multiplies by that, you're looking at 25 million people. The depth of experience that you have represented by those blogs is just amazing. I mean, the reason that somebody was able to get that story out and to begin to question the authenticity of those documents was because there are people out there who are experts in very arcane fields. And they might not necessarily be exposed to the traditional media who are writing the story. I mean, I think that from what I recall reading, and I may be wrong here, the person who actually sort of originally looked at the documents and said, I think that these are forgeries based on, you know, experience that I've had with you know, authenticating documents, was more of an expert on the subject than the person that CBS News had hired to authenticate the documents. That kind of person, you know, 5 years ago, if the exact same story had happened in campaign 2000, there's no way he could have gotten that story from you know, his mouth into the news cycle within 19 minutes. And there's no way that it would have had an impact. What you would have likely seen is that, you know, sometime after the end of the campaign, especially given that it was, you know, just a few weeks before the election, what you would have seen is sometime after the campaign, somebody begins to say, oh, wait, maybe that whole story was wrong, but by that point it's had the impact on the election. I think that because you've got that depth of experience and you've got so many people communicating that way. It's really going to affect news cycles more and more as Joe says, that tail end as it starts wagging back and forth on a story like that.
But what is the danger of misinformation, disinformation, spreading rumors and lies, and there not being a self-correcting mechanism for maybe a couple of days, Joe, do you think?
With blogs?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, look, the first thing we all have to think about is we've had this problem of misinformation since the first days of the Republic. And I like to remind people that when John Adams was running against Thomas Jefferson, Adams' consultants of the day had a certain problem, and that was how do you go negative on the guy who wrote the Declaration of Independence? So the medium of the day was the horse, and they got a bunch of guys up on horseback, and they ran all over the early states screaming at the top of their lungs, Jefferson's dead. Now, if you lived in Delaware and you hadn't seen Jefferson for a couple of months, he didn't look that good the last time you saw him, you could believe he was dead. And that meant that Jefferson's guys had to get guys on horseback running around a week later probably, screaming at the top of their lungs, no, he's alive, and they didn't even have the ability to take a picture of Thomas Jefferson with the New York Times dated today, proving it. So,
proof of life.
Right, so proof of life, right. So, you know, my point is that whether it's television, I mean, the misinformation that's in paid television ads, or radio or the internet, you're going to have that problem. The interesting thing about the blogosphere is the average blogger gets called on it immediately. I mean, if he puts out something that just is not verifiably true, his or her own readers will grill that person down until he says, I fess, I made a mistake, you're right, and here's the difference. And so the thing I found about the blogosphere and about the internet, it's incredibly self-policing. That doesn't mean that there aren't, and the other thing I'd say is, look, yeah, the rumors about the Bush campaign stole the Ohio election. What I think is the thing people need to take about that from the internet is the following. That used to happen. It was just the rumor mill around the water cooler, and we didn't know that a bunch of Americans were sitting around. There's no way to read and understand that a bunch of Americans had this concern or heard this rumor. And so everybody thought the election was stolen or whatever bad thing had happened. And millions of Americans might have been talking about that with their neighbor, but there was no place to see, oh my gosh, look, there are a lot of Americans who think the election was stolen. At that point, mainstream media has a responsibility, and they now know what that responsibility is. Go take a look and either prove that this thing wasn't stolen, or, geez, there was something bad that happened here. Instead of saying, oh, there's just this rumor on the net. It actually gives, I think, the media and our political leaders some insight that they wouldn't normally have about what a big group of the American people believe. And because we never addressed that in Florida, there's still, I mean, that still pervades out there. And we never did count, I mean, the way it all went down, it never got to fruition. Hopefully in Ohio it will. But I'm saying I think it's a healthy thing. That the net bubbles those kinds of rumors out.
I know in New Mexico in 2000, I was with the New Mexico GOP for about 5 years, and over the course of the 5 years, we never had an election that ended on election day. I mean, it always ended 10 days later simply because that's the way New Mexico runs elections. And so in 2000, when they were going back and forth with Florida, and then when they called New Mexico originally for Bush and Gore back and forth, all the people I knew in D.C. were asking me, well, what's going on in New Mexico? What's going on in New Mexico? I said, what do you mean what's going on in New Mexico? This is how we do things. I said, this isn't anything unusual. You guys are just seeing this for the first time in Florida, so it's freaking you out a little bit. But, you know, for us in New Mexico, this is just how elections are run. And it was the same thing. I mean, if somebody's exposed to that for the first time, it creates a panic. But if you're used to it, it was something that was always the case there, and it was always examined as to whether, you know, what ended up happening, but it was just never known to the vast majority.
I invite people in the audience to come to these two microphones here, and when you do, if you'll just tell us your name, and the rules here always are that questions end with a question mark. Right over here, I know this man, Jeff Jarvis.
Hi, I'll introduce myself. I'm Jeff Jarvis. this national campaign stuff is really cute, but isn't it going to really, really matter at a local level, or am I crazy? Are you going to think that is citizens media going to elect mayors and senators and congresspeople and state legislatures in 4 years, or is that going to take 8 years or 12 years? What kind of impact is all of this that you've learned going to have down at a local level?
Well, I think it's already having a huge impact at the local level. I mean, first of all, let me tell you that I believe because of all this activity that happened in all these campaigns, there's a bunch of 22, 23, 24-year-olds who within the next 8 to 10 years will be members of Congress, will be the city councilor on the school board because of the way they connected to the Dean campaign or the Bush campaign or the Kerry campaign. That the net got them involved, and they wouldn't have been involved otherwise. But I also think you're already seeing a lot of local campaigns really understand now that that you can use this tool to get more people involved and actually have them participate in their democracy again, which is pretty important in a democracy. Where I see the thing I always wondered, where I see a big difference, you know, my fantasy of President Kerry, which didn't happen, but the fantasy I saw for him was a guy who actually sent his health care plan to the American people, posted it on whitehouse.gov and emailed it out to bipartisan lists that he could get his hands on, and said, I'm sending it to you before I send it to the Hill. And I'm not sending it to the Hill till June 15th. And I want you to talk about it. I want you to understand what we're trying to do here. And it's up to you to stop the lobbyists, because I can't, but you can. And actually, so I think you're going to see this, I think, have an effect on governance. And I think you may actually see that used at a local level before you actually see it used at a national level. A mayor saying, this is what I want to do about transportation, or somehow start to get the citizenry involved in participating in a way that lets people meet up, or I mean, use some of these tools that we've all been engaged with this year, and actually get people to participate in the process at the local level, and then I think it transforms to campaigns at the local level. So I think I'm really excited about where we're at and what I think is going to happen. I can't, you know, I keep thinking that it had to happen. We had to have a lot of stuff happen to get us here. But it's there now, I think.
Right over here.
Can I actually touch base on that just on another side really quick? I'll be short, brief. The other aspect of that is that a lot of people have been questioning what the role of parties is going to be given the campaign finance restrictions and sort of the restrictions that they place on things. One of the things I think you may also see is with regard to the internet, a lot of the tools that we built on the presidential side were very expensive tools, and they're tools that are very much out of reach for a lot of local campaigns. And what I think that one of the areas I think that parties can be most effective is to actually build an infrastructure for their candidates so that you're providing those tools to your candidates, and your candidates have access to the large list of all the people that live in their area that have signed up online, and so you can facilitate a lot of that through the party structure as well.
We could write them both in open source and steal them from each other too.
Right over here.
Yeah, I'm Bill Bates from Pittsburgh. Our daughter's a senior at the college, a government concentrator. We've been criticized as a people over the last 2-3 decades of becoming more and more shallow and more narrow in our views on things. Which direction do you see the internet taking us as a people, being broader and deeper understanding of the issues, or more soundbite, more limited view? Which way do you see us going here in terms of our country?
Well, I think that one of the answer to that question, I think, is going to largely be answered over the course of the next 4 years, because I was discussing with somebody today what I sort of see as one of the big effects of this campaign was the pop culture effect. I think that this campaign had a lot more coverage in pop culture than past campaigns have, and so I'm trying to get a sense of exactly how much of the campaign and the excitement around the campaign was based on the pop culture effect, and how much of it was a part of sort of getting involved and more community focused. I think that if we see people sticking with the process and that they stay involved in politics and that there is this sort of new generation of people who become politically active, I think that it makes us a much deeper, it makes it a much deeper experience as people. I think that if a lot of the people sort of drop out again because the only reason they were there is because they saw all the celebrities coming out and they saw the athletes coming out and they saw all these different people and they wanted to be part of what was sort of, you know, political chic for a period of 6 months, then I think that it makes us a bit more shallow.
Right over here.
Yes, I'm Allison Ramer. I'm a first-year student at Lesley University. This question's directed for Kathleen and Michael, mainly. Although Joe already touched on the voter fraud that's been buzzing across the internet, the 1,100 accounts of black box errors and the 37,000 accounts of voter fraud, how do you address the fact that the media seems to be the cap on reality or not within our society, and how do you think the internet can influence that?
Well, I'd actually be curious to hear your standpoint from the media side.
In any given newsroom today, people are checking with blogs. It's a brand new source. I mean, the first transformation was newsrooms, print and broadcast, watching 24-hour cable nonstop. And the effect of watching what cable chooses as their news diet, having a great impact as to what goes into nightly newscasts and tomorrow morning's newspaper. The Howard Dean scream is a good example of that. Print reporters who were in the room with Howard Dean didn't think he screamed. It was only after the New York Times and the Washington Post newsroom saw him screaming on cable television that they wrote the stories about the scream, because it was a microphone problem that created the scream. Bloggers are now weighing in as part of sort of that news process. You saw it with the Dan Rather story, where suddenly they weighed in as a news source. And that happens in newsrooms every day today. So it means that news is becoming more of a conversation. And there is Jeff Jarvis taught me this. Basically, the barriers to entry of news have lowered, and people who were news receivers, news consumers, are now also in that process of providing news as they go onto blog sites, create a buzz, provide information. And it's when it rises to a certain level that mainstream media realizes they can't ignore it. Right now, the cautious way to handle that is to say, well, the bloggers are reporting, while you then assemble your own news team to investigate what they're reporting and try and investigate it on yourself. And that's something that they're very much in the process of trying to do right now. But it's kind of a new source of information that casts a very wide net, much wider than most news organizations, which are getting smaller because of budget constraints, much wider than they could ever have imagined, I think.
And I think that, you know, as Joe was saying, I mean, these stories have always kind of been around following elections. I know that following 2000, there was a voting machine that mysteriously appeared in a locked closet in a school in New Mexico that ended up giving Gore the margin of 366 votes. They found 500 Gore votes on this machine in a closet somewhere. And the Republicans within the state were just, you know, aghast at, oh, how could this be? How could they flip the state for Gore just by, you know, by these votes? We don't know how real they are. I think that by raising that concern and then having the actual media go out and inspect it, because they have far more resources than a blogger necessarily would to actually get to the truth and to interview the people that were involved in that, you know, it turned out that was, you know, likely a very legitimate exercise, and that those votes had in fact actually been misplaced because the machine had been broken down and they moved it out of the way for storage, whatever. But it's a matter of having the voices that sort of raise that up to the media attention. I think that really helps out.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the one thing is that the media is like it or not fueling the blogosphere. And let me give the two best examples I can give of this are the war. When the mainstream media all went embed during the war, and which meant they were giving us the same flavor of coverage on every single channel and every single thing you saw, people who wanted any kind of other information, any other angle at all, had only one place to go, the blogosphere. And so all of a sudden you get exponential growth of eyeballs going to the blogs and exponential growth of bloggers, because if you can only get one flavor, and the only other place to go is the blogs, that's where people went. The best example, though, was Election Day. MSNBC, ABC, CBS, all these guys spend a ton of money on exit polls. And then they leak them to their friends in the campaign. And the friends in the campaign leak them to the blogs. And so suddenly, think about this. You're in the eyeball business. You're MSNBC, and you want people to watch MSNBC. They're not watching MSNBC. Why? Because they're at Wonkette reading the Pennsylvania exit poll numbers that you paid for. And so we actually created, the mainstream media was actually driving people to the blogosphere to find out the real information. Now, it turned out the exit polls were all wrong, but the blogs were actually doing a better job of reporting what information was out there than the mainstream media. And so I think you're going to, this little struggle that's going on, this little trying to figure out between the mainstream media and the blogs, how the blogs are going to have a huge effect and continue to have it. And you know, they either shouldn't even do exit polls, they definitely can't leak them anymore. I mean, they can't give them to Karl Rover, to Joe Trippi, because Karl will call up Drudge or I'll call up Wonkette, you know, or whatever happens here. And they'll be out in 2 seconds. So the mainstream media's got to change it a lot in how they
It is sort of
things.
a shift that we're seeing in the power structure in the news business, and I think you're also seeing this in politics, where you know, the people have more of a higher role in this power structure. But it's also a great window, because if you imagine that you're in Baghdad and you can't get to Fallujah to cover the story, but you find some bloggers that are holed up in Fallujah and you start a conversation, suddenly you're able to penetrate an area that, as a reporter as intrepid as you are, you can't get to. And I think that, as this becomes a worldwide phenomenon of conversation over the web, that is going to really transform reporting in many ways. Right over here.
Hi, I'm Joe Green, senior at the college and just off the Kerry campaign. Mr. Trippi, you were alluding to policy coming from kind of this massive grassroots people, and as the DNC and the Democratic Party tries to find its soul after the election, you see lots of people move on in all these different groups. Every person has their opinion on where the party should go. And yet, at the same time, the Democratic Party's possibly greatest problem is not having a unified message. So how do you kind of rectify this conflict between the greatness of the grassroots and all these different opinions with holding a unified message, something that Mr. Turk's party does quite a bit better?
Well, in our party, if you have an answer to that question, we want to make you the DNC chairman. I think that
The job's open.
Yeah, and the job is open. I think that it's not. There's nothing. The magic of what's happened is, if you really think about this, right, is there's one thing most Americans can agree on, and that is they don't like Washington. Okay, and the Democratic Party has become, through a lot of successes or whatever of the past, sort of become the identified Washington Party. And so what we need to do is get ideas, not from Washington experts, but from people out there you know, and so it is about having a great American conversation within the party about what ideas are out there, what do we want to do, what can we build together. It's also about getting back to talking about the common good. That it's a lot of things that have been sort of lost in our discourse, and that the Democrats just don't talk about anymore. And how that, I think the best way to do that is to not have some big name be the party chair. Do what the Republicans are. I mean, Ken Mehlman's a big name, but I mean, have somebody who's really good at managing things, understands how to build a grassroots organization, how to target, how to build that, and let the voices out there. I mean, whether it's Evan Bayh in Indiana, or Howard Dean, or Hillary Clinton, or John Kerry, John Edwards, let them compete for what the message in this party should be, because as one of them emerges, that's where the party is going to end up going, and all of us can impact that by how we line up behind those different people, instead of trying to house some, you know, in one day wave a wand and we've got the perfect face for the party. I just don't think is the right thing to do.
Out of curiosity, can I touch base on a quick follow-up? What did you think of Wolfson's suggestion that the party itself should be the ones who actually elect the chairman through the internet or through mail? Or?
He basically said anybody who's contributed, signed up, paid dues,
voted in the primary,
should
whatever.
be in the tent that is deciding this.
I think that'd be better than how it's going to be decided. I don't know that that'd be a perfect way to do it, but it'd be a lot better than 440 people who are relatively resistant to change and part of a sort of established. I mean, we have to reform the party from the ground up, and I don't want to get on my soapbox about that. But we have to reform it from the ground up, and that's the problem when trying to fix it from the DNC level.
Up here.
Hi. Very interesting panel. Thank you. I'm curious about what you think about, you mentioned that the internet has helped reduce the barriers to entry to the media. We have significant barriers to entry in the political realm. It takes so much money to run a campaign, but at the same time, it also takes a certain level of affluence and education to use the internet. So I'm wondering, if you think, on the one hand, it helps candidates run a campaign and reach people with a much lower budget. On the other hand, who are they reaching? Are we really helping to diversify our electorate or help, are we helping, white guys communicate better to white guys? Or are we helping to get more people involved in the electoral process?
Michael, why don't you tackle that one?
I really think you are sort of helping the process, because one of the things you're doing is you're not only reducing the barrier to entry in terms of the candidate and giving them the tools, but you're also reducing.
Sorry, a little bit of water.
You're also reducing the barrier of entry to the activists, the people who are actually going to make the campaign successful. I mean, we on the Republican side talk a great deal about the organization of the campaign, actually sort of creating that ground team that's actually going to go out and do things. But the first, that always begins with recruiting your volunteers and recruiting the people who support your candidate. And the more people that you can get online, the better, because those are people that you don't have to expend necessarily the financial resources to reach. And so if you can use the internet to reach that group, I think you're going to get a broad cross-section of people, because people are interested in the ideas regardless of sort of their income level. You do have, obviously, the sort of technology haves versus the technology have-nots. That there's a bigger discussion there, obviously, in terms of the spread of technology within the country and across the people. But in terms of giving them the way to participate, I think that the internet definitely helps in that.
I think if you think about the internet as the information age, it's the wrong way to think about it. It's the age of empowerment. And if you can empower just 2 people to do something, I want to give you exactly the example. In Austin, Texas, the Dean campaign had 481 email names. And we emailed those people and said, he's coming in 2 weeks, 2 Thursdays from now. And we thought if half the people on that email list showed up, or 3/4 of them, be 200-300 people, it'd be amazing. We'd have a barbecue out in the park. We got to that park, there were 3,200 people there. And what happened was 2 people who got the original email, one of them sent an email out saying, if he's coming in 2 weeks, let's get together and figure out what we can do to spread the word that he's coming. The next thing that happened was 100 people showed up at the guy's house. These were 100 folks that got that email from him. And they showed up at his house, and they decided amongst themselves, the campaign knew nothing about this. This is that chaos that people were talking about. They decided to leaflet the entire Latino community of Austin, Texas. There were 50 polling places in Austin for some city council race or something that was going on at the time. There were 100 of them, so they assigned each other, you and I are going to go do Austin precinct number 1. These 2 folks are going to do precinct number 2. They went to all 50 precincts, stood outside the polling place, and leafleted people that were voting that day, whether Republican or Democrat, said Howard Dean's going to be here. This is on Tuesday. He's going to be here Thursday, 2 days from now. When we got there were 3,200 people in that park. Over half of that crowd was Latino. Over half of them didn't own a computer, right? It's the catalyst. It's a tool to empower some folks to go out and reach out beyond that. And the other thing I'd say is there are a bunch of myths about the Dean campaign. The first one, Scott Heiferman, who's here from Meetup.com. They kept stats on who was showing up, who had signed up for Meetup, 190,000 people or so. Average age of a Dean Meetup attender, 47. Not these kids that everybody keeps talking about. The other one is we knew where people were coming to sign up for us, which site they were clicking from. So makes sense. Google's number 1. You put Howard Dean there, bing. You're there. You're on our site. You sign up. 2 was Yahoo. All these sites made tremendous sense until you got to number 6, blackvoices.com. For 13 months, the number 6 site that referred more people to join up on the Dean campaign was blackvoices.com. And number 7, which I will never be able to figure out, was Madonna.com. And we kept going over that.
We're going to take 2 last questions right here.
I'm Jay Rosen from NYU, and I write the weblog PressThink. During the campaign, I paid a great deal of attention to the news. I got very familiar with the campaign story. And one of the things I tried to write about in my weblog was alternatives to the master narrative of politics, of winning, the alternatives to the horse race, to the familiar tale that we hear. And in doing that, I tried to think, well, what other ways are we divided? What other ways is politics divided than just the winners, the losers, the Democrats, the Republicans? And this year, a better narrative, or an interesting narrative, was those in politics who still believe in and practice control, and the forces in politics that are really about decontrol. And the internet is certainly one of those. And this is a story about 2004 that I think dropped out of a lot of the journalism. It was there underneath it. But in the party, you had the war between the forces of control, who had always controlled the Democratic Party, and the forces of decontrol. And I think in the Republican Party, there was probably that tension as well, although it didn't get as much publicity as on the Democratic side. So that would be one way to rewrite the story of the campaign. Looking forward, my question is, you've got all these people in politics whose whole career, as all of their expertise, is tied up in control, message control, control of the machine, control of the money, control of the story, control of the news. Practically the entire political class is based on the arts of control. And if the internet is really going to decontrol politics and messages and media, then what happens to this class of people whose entire world is based on the idea of control? So that's the question I have after 2004.
Michael?
Well, in terms of thinking of the concept of control versus decontrolled sort of dropped out of the media, I'd like to actually recognize Chuck DeFeo here, who was my partner in crime on the E-campaign, and he and I had many, many conversations, because every article we saw about our E-campaign was, the Bush campaign is all about control. I mean, it was probably the lead in almost every paragraph that we read about the E-campaign, and how, you know, everything we were doing was from the top down. Everything we were issuing marching orders. We were telling people to go do everything, and there was absolutely internally no feeling of that. I don't think. I mean, everything that we did was built around, you know, what can we do to reach out to people who want to be involved in this and give them the ability to do that. So the tools I was talking about earlier in terms of like the walk lists and the phone lists, everything that we did was to say there are people out there who, you know, Putnam's book, Bowling Alone, I noticed that was sort of referenced in regard to Meetup on something I was reading the other day, and it talked about the fact that Meetup was based on the notion that bowling alone was somewhat depressing, because people were out there doing all these things on their own, and there should be a way to sort of get this cohesion of this community. And I think that part of the problem with that is that there are a lot of people who just don't want to be necessarily part of a communal structure, but they want to be involved. And so what we were doing on the campaign was trying to give them the tools that they could actively participate in the campaign without any guidance from us whatsoever. We were trying to decentralize as much as possible their ability to go online and take action and help us get elected without ever having to talk to anybody at the campaign if they so chose. And so I think that you know, there was a lot of discussion about the fact that we were very top down, and I think that was more based on the fact that we were just, our game, I think, was a little bit tighter in terms of we knew exactly where we wanted to go. We knew, you know, kind of what we needed to do to get there, and we executed that plan very well, I think. But it wasn't necessarily in terms of you're going to go do this and you have to make, you know, while our political people did have goals for how many contacts we would make in terms of phone calls and those sorts of things, we were never telling a volunteer, you have to go make 10 calls or we're going to fail. I mean, it was all a matter of, here are these tools. If you can use these to help spread the message, that's very important to the campaign. And if they chose to do so, then we were thrilled to have that.
I know Joe could do an hour on this. I've got to catch an 8 o'clock shuttle at Logan. So a TV soundbite on this, Joe. And then afterwards, I invite further discussion of that.
I mean, look, there's a reason the country's so divided, and it's because the consulting classes of both parties are really good at trying to do one thing and one thing only, get 50.1. You get 50 plus 1 and you win. And so because of polling, because of all the other high-tech stuff we haven't talked about tonight, targeting, et cetera, both consultant classes have gotten exceptionally good at trying to get to that 50 plus 1 number. Not 80, not 6, not bring the country together, no, divide it. Okay, so that's why we're in the sort of the mess we're in. And that's not a pox on any party's consultants, it's on all of us. So, but they're just doing their jobs, okay? The really important thing is, yeah, the McCain campaign was the Republican establishment slapping down somebody trying to reform the party from within. The Dean campaign was the Democratic establishment slapping down a reform effort from within the party. The difference between 2000 and 2004 and going forward was neither, at that point, up until this election, there was no place for that urge to go. You stepped outside the party, where were you going to raise $50 to $200 million? Where were you going to get 650, a million people out on the street organizing for you? Wasn't possible. Well, guess what, guys? The net's here. The power of all of us. It's an eBay thing that I love. But that's what this is about now. And so the problem is that both parties continue to slap down reform and not actually get that this is about empowering the people, about people participating again. They're not going to be able to stop that urge. It's going to go outside both parties, and one party, probably the Democrats, is going to go the way of the Whigs, because you cannot continue to have an establishment that continues to crush this urge among the American people for change.
Last question.
Sam Lesson, I'm a senior at the college. Mr. Tribune, I think you actually started to touch on the answer to my question, but in general, do you see the internet in the next 4 years, next 8 years, the next whatever years, being a force which strengthens the existing two-party system or tears it down?
Probably weak. I mean, first of all, the two parties are becoming more and more irrelevant every day. I mean, look at the two conventions. I don't mean that they're totally irrelevant, but I'm saying they're less relevant, obviously, than they were 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. The net, like I just said, you can suddenly raise, what did you need to be in the party for? The fundraising structure, the organizational structure. These things are becoming more blurred as you see the hundreds of millions of dollars that were raised by grassroots organizations that had nothing to, I mean, were not official arms of either party. And so, like I said, if you continue, the last thing, I won't get on a soapbox, the most important number for you to remember is that there's only one category that the Democratic Party beats the Republican Party in terms of fundraising. It's not $100 and below, it's not $100,000 below, not $1 million below, it's $1 million and above. Okay, so the Democratic Party beats the Republican Party on contributions of $1 million and more. And like, you can't have that kind of establishment continue to crush this sort of bottom-up $25, $50 we want to say, and not squish it outside the party if that's what you want. I mean, the Democratic Party could reform itself, or I believe, yeah, somewhere because of the internet and some John McCain kind of guy, I mean, somebody, you know, who I don't know yet today, is going to be able, Angus King, I think, no, he'd kill me if you heard me say that out loud. You know, but somebody is going to come along and run an independent candidacy outside the two parties, and they're going to wreak havoc on these two parties.
I think one thing we can count on, we'll see these two gentlemen involved in 2008, and it's great that you shared so much wisdom with us in 2004. Thanks very much, and I invite you, if you have more questions, to come up and informally ask them. Thank you very much.
Thank you.